Thank you very much. Good morning. It is a delight to be here as always. And a few weeks ago, when I saw that I was scheduled to speak today, I called Reverend Ian and I said, "What's the theme? What would you like me to speak on?" And she says, "Well, I'm speaking on the divine feminine. Somebody is speaking on the divine masculine." And I said, "Well, how about if I speak on the sacred marriage then? That might be appropriate." So we'll see if that works. The philosopher Plato had a myth that he shared often. And he talked about how at one time, many eons ago, when the gods first created human beings, they were round, fully spherical. And they had 2 heads and 4 arms and 4 legs. They were very powerful beings. In fact, they were so powerful that they frightened the gods. The gods became jealous. And so Zeus sent a thunderbolt, cut them in half. And ever since then, one half has been looking for its other half. Since the beginning of human history. So now you know why we only have 1 head, 2 arms, and 2 legs, and why we're so busy looking for that other half of ourselves, as it would seem. So this is, on the surface, it's a silly fable, but if we look beyond the surface, we see there's a great deal of wisdom in that we are essentially whole beings, but we don't necessarily feel whole. As a living soul, we are whole. We are born as whole beings, potentially capable of virtually anything. But then we enter into a physical body. We are socialized, we are educated, we are enculturated, and we divide, repress, and we split ourselves in various ways. So that our wholeness is still there, but we don't experience it. We aren't able to access it. So it's like a beautiful gem that gets covered up with dirt or dust and not recognized. The well-known psychologist, Dr. Carl Jung, who was incredibly insightful, I thought, for his era, recognized that human beings were divided. And he saw that there were 2 primary divisions in this splitting process, if you will. And the one division is between our outer face to the world and our inner face to who we are when nobody's looking. Those are 2 different selves for most of us. So we learn at a very early age that mom and dad want us to show them a particular face. We learn that our teachers want to see a particular face. They don't necessarily want to see who we are, but who they think we should be. So we put on that mask, and like the Phantom of the Opera, part of us goes behind the curtain, down the basement and underground. And that particular split is referred to as the persona, which means mask, and the shadow, which is the part that's in the darkness. And it's not just in the darkness from the world, it's in the darkness from ourselves as well. Another split that virtually all of us have, is that split between male and female. You could blame Zeus for this one, but it happens to all of us. Because as souls, we are whole and complete, both male and female. But as human beings, we are one or the other. We identify as being primarily male or primarily female, partly because we live in biological, physical bodies that are typically male or female. But perhaps even more than that, we are enculturated in our maleness and femaleness. Our identity is very deeply embedded in that. You know, if you hear that a friend of yours had a baby, Mary had a baby, what's the first question we're going to ask? Sure, is it a boy or is it a girl? That's one of our primary identities, right from the get-go. And we learn that there's not only a biological difference, but girl babies are supposed to be different than boy babies. And not just in the color of the blankets, but as they grow up, they're supposed to behave differently. They're supposed to be very different than boys, and boys very different than girls. And we're taught that from 10,000 different ways every day, in subtle and sometimes not so subtle forms. So this particular split, Jung called the anima and the animus. The anima, he said, is the inner female within males. The animus is the inner male within the females. So anima is within the males. And I always remembered it that way because anima is like animama, okay? It's the inner mama. And with women, it's the inner father, the inner male. It's not just our mother and father, but they become our first role models. What does it mean to be a boy? Well, I turn to my dad to find out what it means to be a boy. What does it mean to be a girl? I look at my mother. You see. For better or worse, that's who educates us. And yet, the characteristics are even more than just our enculturation. If we look at the universe, if we look at life, we see that there are two different modalities of being. In the Chinese religion of Taoism, they recognize, and at the very heart of Taoism, is what's called the yin and the yang. The yin is typically related to the female, but it's really much more than gender. And yang, or yang, is related to the male, but it's much more than gender as well. Yang is the active principle. It is the principle of outwardness, expansion, initiative, discernment. Yang is typically what we relate with males, but not all males are necessarily like that. Yin is the receptive, the passive, the nurturing, the creative. We can see many examples of this in the world of nature. If I plant a seed in the ground, in the earth, which one is the male and which is the female? The seed is the male, the earth is the female. The two unite and a new life is born. And so that's the creative process. It's more than just man and woman, male and female. Yin and yang is part of the very creative process itself. light and dark, sun and moon, all of it connected. So, how does this relate to human beings? Well, if we look at human marriage, this is, I won't say it's a non-sacred marriage, but conventional marriage, okay? The marriage that most people consider what marriage is about. We see that over the time of history, marriage has been for many reasons, for survival to begin with, for political reasons, economic reasons, as time went on. And today we get married, why? Not for economic reasons so much, or political reasons, or survival reasons, but because we are in love. That's all that's needed is love, right? Well, love may be all that's needed, but being in love and love are not necessarily the same thing, okay? Being in love, romantic love, is based largely upon projection. It's based largely upon seeing the invisible part of myself in someone else. It's called projection because it's a lot like a projector. If you put a light behind a film, what's on the film that maybe you can't see, you can see it out there. Okay? And so projection works much the same way for us. So we are attracted to our opposite, not so much because of them, though it may appear that way, but because there's something in them that we see that gives us a feeling, or at least a hope, of that wholeness. It's sort of like these two halves coming together again, as Plato would say. And, okay, I'm going to be whole once again. Now, the sacred marriage is a little bit different, but it's similar in that it's our inner male and female, the anima, the animus. It's that internal split is healed, is connected. That's very powerful when that happens. Jesus talked about this. Now, you probably didn't hear this in Sunday school, but in the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the Gospels of the wisdom teachings of Jesus, he gave to his disciples the teaching, as we may be familiar with from the Synoptic Gospels, become his children and you will enter the kingdom of heaven. So in the Gospel of Thomas, he takes it a step further. And the disciples say, okay, if we then become children, shall we enter the kingdom? And Jesus said to him, in a sense, I'm going to paraphrase here, it's not quite that easy. And I'm going to read this twice because this is a little bit deep. He said, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside as the outside, when you make the inside as the outside, and the outside as the inside, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, then you shall enter the kingdom. He sounds like a Jungian psychologist there, doesn't he? So, to unpack this, what does it mean to make the inside as the outside? Well, I would relate this to integrating the persona and the shadow, so that the persona and the shadow are reconciled, so that we don't live split, but who we are is what we show the world. We're congruent, we're genuine, we're authentic. So that's phase one. That in itself is not easy. That can take a long time. as we all know. We're still working on it, aren't we? And then, as you make the male and the female into a single one. Interesting. So, the anima, the animus, the inner male, the inner female, that's what I'm referring to as the sacred marriage. The sacred marriage brings us into wholeness. Now, I don't know if that means we get big and round and we have two heads, but it doesn't matter. So, an obvious question is, how do I go about doing this? Well, we could talk a long time, of course, but I want to talk about, in general, how do I go about making peace between the male and the female? I mean, with many of us, they're not even dating, let alone being married, right? They're not even talking to one another, maybe. See? So first, we start out by getting them to talk to each other. We begin by recognizing that within ourselves. Recognizing that inner male and that inner female. So, noticing in ourselves, let's come back to the Taoism, to the yin. In Chinese philosophy, the feminine or negative principle of the two opposing cosmic forces into which creative energy divides and whose fusion in physical matter brings about the phenomenal world into being. So the yin is characterized by the dark, by the coolness, by wetness, by receptivity, by passivity, often related to the feelings in the heart. So the feminine is that soft, receptive, nurturing, receiving. The yang, the positive, male, the sun, the positive principle, characterized by light, warmth, dryness, activity. So the yang is the doing, the active. And so if we look at all creativity, we see there is a male or an active principle, and we see there's a female, there's a receptive principle. There's a force, and there's a fruition. So let's talk some more about this. How do we do this? How do we integrate these two and become deeply creative and whole? So one is to be aware of these sides in each of us. Not to judge, and not to equate them with male or female in a physical sense, but just to recognize the yin, the female within all of us. To recognize the yang, the male within each of us, you see. We have periods of activity, doingness, taking the initiative. And we have periods of solitude and relaxing, surrendering. If you like to canoe, as I do, there's times when you paddle. There's times when you put the oar in the canoe and you go with the flow. There's a positive and there's a negative, you see. In our everyday life, we wake up in the morning, yang, get up, do something. At night, there's the yin, there's the letting go, there's the withdrawal, see. All of that needs to be balanced in our life. That's all part of the creative process. So recognizing and appreciating each of these. Appreciating the relationship between the two. Another very simple and close reminder is our own breath. Notice there's a breathing in and breathing out. There's a yin, there's a yang. So when I breathe in, I have to consciously breathe in. But breathing out is automatically, isn't it? So there's a balance. If that gets out of balance, my body's not going to be healthy. Even my mind is not going to be healthy. So becoming aware of and appreciating the relationship in each of us between that active and passive, that sowing and nurturing. And then a third one would be to begin to express each. Learn to begin bringing into our life that sense of balance. Now, looking at our life, maybe some of us are overly young, not overly young, but overly young, Y-A-N-G. We're busy doing. We live in a very young culture. The West traditionally has been very young. Science, very active. Militant, doing, conquering, so on and so forth. So recognizing that's part of our life, but that needs to be balanced with the letting go, the receptive, and so forth. I was fortunate enough to spend a week on the West Coast in August, and I just love to watch the tide come in and go out. Comes in, goes out. Ebbs and it flows. The waves come in and the waves go out. They go up and they go down. Everything is in movement, everything is in balance. The birds, when they flap their wings are in balance. There's a time of flapping their wings, and there's a time when they just sail. So being aware in our own lives, being aware in the world of nature, that active and that passive, that yin and that yang, and then bringing that into expression in our own life in whatever way may be appropriate for you. And to recognize that if we have a tendency to be overly masculine, overly doing, maybe to begin nurturing the other side, begin to express the other side. Surrender, let go, let life happen. On the other hand, if we happen to be more inclined to be passive and just go with the flow, maybe we need to lean a little bit more into the yang side, the active side. Take initiative, set boundaries, that type of a thing. So just what is it that is needed for balance and for creativity? And then fourth, to begin to dialogue. Let these two parts dialogue with one another. It can be a very interesting process. There's a number of ways to do it. We can do it journaling, writing. We can do it with a voice dialogue. There's a whole lot of different ways we can do it, but let the inner masculine and the inner feminine begin a dialogue. I mean, after all, if they're going to be married, they need to begin speaking to one another, right? So that's always a good way. Just as the union of physical male and female creates new life, so does the inner union create new life. And that can happen in a number of different levels, a number of different ways. One example is thinking and feeling. Which one is yang? Thinking. Which one is yin? Feeling, okay? So we balance thinking and feeling. We also recognize that in order to create something in our life, we need to have both of those. So just thinking is not enough. Thinking alone can be very dry. Feeling alone can just go nowhere. We need to have a clear idea, and we need to nurture that idea in our heart, in our own being, you see. That's the male and the female, thinking and feeling. You know, it's often said, as a man, as a woman, thinketh in his or her heart, so is he, so is she. It's the thinking, but also in the heart. Thoughts need to reach the feelings. The mind and the heart need to be united. A clear idea infused with feeling is very powerful. And that's the beginning of all creation, is to have an idea, to have an intention, and then to bring that intention into the soil that is fertile and will nourish that. And let's see, I'm going to skip something here. There's a story, but I won't go into it now. Then there's another marriage that's even more profound, much more profound. And that is the marriage of spirit and soul, where the soul itself becomes receptive and spirit becomes the active principle. In the Bible, the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, who was the father of Jesus Christ? Holy Spirit. Mary was the receptive soul. And in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary that summarizes Charles Fillmore's metaphysical meanings to different people in the Bible, he talked about Mary as being the purified soul. The purified soul infused with the Holy Spirit gives birth to the Christ. So, what does that mean? Well, how do we purify the soul? How do we purify the heart? Forgiveness, non-attachment, receptivity, openness, non-resistance. Okay, these are all yin, right? Yin qualities, receptive qualities. And then we open up to the inflow of spirit. So the masculine doesn't come from any human conditioning, but it comes from that masculine creative principle of the universe. God said, "Let there be light." But before there was light, what was there? Darkness. So, the light infusing the darkness was the creation of the physical universe, according to the story in Genesis. Just very quickly, Jesus was baptized. Baptism is symbolic of cleansing and letting go. And when Jesus was baptized, what happened? The Holy Spirit, it says, entered. And the Father said, "This is my beloved Son." If we look at the disciples at the time of Pentecost, they lost their beloved leader, Jesus. And they were sitting open, receptive in the upper room. And what happened? The Holy Spirit descended. That was Pentecost. And they were transformed from the disciples to the apostles. Apostle means messenger. So, as we allow this process to happen in ourselves, we become messengers. We become vehicles for the divine. And as it says in the Course in Miracles, I have come to do the will of him who sent me. As I allow my soul to be purified, that's my work. Forgiveness is my primary function. Again, that's from the Course. And the Holy Spirit then enters into my awareness, and my life then becomes an expression of the Christ consciousness. And from then on, we begin to live the life that God has destined for us. And so I am so happy to be able to share this with you this morning, and thank you for your attentive listening. God bless you.